The airport rush was normal until a little girl did something no one expected. She walked through the crowded terminal holding a man's hand, but something was wrong, terribly wrong. She never spoke, never smiled, never looked around. Her soft brown hair was neatly brushed, her clothes perfectly matched, but her eyes were hollow. Then, without warning, she brushed her sleeve 3 times. Slowly, deliberately, a silent signal. No one understood except one. The only one who noticed was a police dog named Vigil. Instantly, Vigil froze. His ears shot forward. His entire body went rigid as steel. A low, rumbling tension filled the space around him, the kind that makes seasoned officers check their weapons. Suddenly, the dog moved, not with aggression, but with purpose, positioning himself directly between the man and the children. Officer Silas Thorne tightened his grip on the leash, confused. Trained police dogs never reacted this intensely without visible cause. But the fear radiating from those 3 children said everything they couldn't say out loud. Why would a child signal a trained police dog? Within minutes, Vigil uncovered a truth so shocking. The entire airport security team would be placed on high alert. Stay with us because this story will leave you breathless. Before we start, make sure to hit like and subscribe. And really, I'm curious. Where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. I love seeing how far our stories travel. The airport was alive long before the afternoon rush hit its peak. Rolling suitcases clicked across the polished marble floors. Overhead announcements echoed through vaulted terminals, and exhausted travelers shuffled from one checkpoint to the next. It was the kind of controlled chaos where no one noticed anything except their own itinerary, their own stress, their own tight connections. But Officer Silas Thorne had trained himself to see what others overlooked. Standing beside him was Vigil, one of the most trusted K-9 officers in the entire Metropolitan Security Division. The 4-year-old German shepherd sat tall and alert, his amber eyes scanning the moving sea of humanity with an intelligence that bordered on unnerving. Where most people saw crowds, Vigil saw patterns. Where most saw strangers, Vigil sensed intent. Silas had learned long ago to trust the dog's instincts more than his own eyes. More than documentation, more than protocol. And on this particular afternoon, that trust would save 3 lives. Silas Thorne had been working airport security for 11 years, but he'd been reading Vigil for only 4. For years that felt like a lifetime. For years that had fundamentally changed how he understood his job. Most handlers treated their K-9 partners like sophisticated equipment, tools with 4 legs and exceptional noses. Silas knew better. Vigil wasn't a tool. He was a translator, converting invisible truths into body language. Silas had learned to read like scripture. They moved through Terminal C with practiced efficiency, Vigil's stride matching Silas's perfectly. No leash tension, no commands needed. To an observer, they looked like a single organism navigating the chaos with supernatural coordination. Vigil's head turned in precise increments, cataloging scents, noting anomalies, filtering thousands of chemical signatures for the handful that mattered. The morning rush had given way to the afternoon lull, that deceptive quiet between waves of departures when security personnel grabbed coffee and pretended the next surge wouldn't be worse. But Silas never relaxed. The lulls were when predators operated best, when distraction reached its peak, when a moment of inattention could cost everything. He watched a family of tourists struggle with oversized luggage. A businessman barked into his phone about missed connections. A young mother juggled a crying infant and 3 carry-ons, her exhaustion written in the slump of her shoulders. Normal. All of it crushingly, beautifully normal. Vigil paused near the food court, his nostrils flaring slightly. Silas felt the shift immediately, not an alert, just interest. The dog's attention fixed briefly on a teenager wearing too much cologne, then moved on. False positive. Vigil's tail gave a single wag, his version of never mind. Silas smiled despite himself. Good boy, he murmured, though Vigil hadn't done anything except exist with excellence. They continued their patrol past Gate 14, where an elderly couple sat holding hands, their boarding passes clutched like sacred documents. Past the bookstore where a child pressed her face against the window, mesmerized by stuffed animals she'd probably never receive. Past the bathroom entrance where a janitor methodically cleaned already spotless floors. And then, without warning, the memory hit him. It always happened like this, ambushing him when his guard was down, when the airport felt safe and his mind wandered. The girl's name had been Sophia, 7 years old, traveling with a woman who had all the right documentation, all the correct answers, all the bureaucratic boxes checked. Silas had noticed the wrongness. The child's vacant stare, the woman's too smooth responses, the way Sophia flinched when touched. But he'd followed protocol. He'd called it in through proper channels. He'd waited for authorization to intervene. By the time authorization came, Sophia and the woman had boarded a flight to Mexico City. By the time international agencies coordinated, the trail had gone cold. Sophia had vanished into a network that specialized in making children disappear, and Silas had stood in the terminal holding a printout of procedures he'd followed perfectly. Perfectly wrong. He'd requested a K-9 partner the next week. If he couldn't trust his own judgment, couldn't trust the system, he'd trust something more fundamental. He'd trust a creature that couldn't be fooled by paperwork or intimidated by protocol. A creature that read fear the way humans read road signs. Vigil had saved 4 lives in their partnership so far. For interventions that started with the dog's body going rigid, his breathing changing, his entire being screaming danger in a language only Silas understood. For people who went home to their families because Silas had learned to trust the truth written in a dog's posture over the lies written on official documents. They rounded the corner toward the main security checkpoint, and Silas pushed Sophia's ghost back into the compartment where he kept his failures. Vigil glanced up at him, amber eyes reflecting something that looked almost like understanding. I know, Silas said quietly. I know. The dog's tail wagged once. Then Vigil's attention snapped forward, his entire body shifting into a stance Silas had learned to recognize instantly. Alert, focused, certain. Something was wrong. Vigil's transformation was instantaneous and absolute. One moment, he was the picture of relaxed professionalism, alert but calm, scanning without urgency. The next, every muscle in his body coiled tight, his spine straightening to perfect vertical alignment. His ears locked forward like radar dishes, triangulating on something Silas couldn't yet see. The dog's breathing changed, becoming shallow and controlled, the way it did when he detected explosives or weapons. But this was different. This was personal. Silas's hand instinctively dropped to Vigil's shoulder, feeling the tremor of controlled tension running through the dog's frame. "What is it, boy?" he murmured, already following Vigil's locked gaze across the terminal. At first, Silas saw nothing remarkable. Just the usual parade of humanity shuffling toward the security checkpoint. Business travelers checking their watches, families herding children, solo passengers lost in their phones. Then his eyes found what Vigil had already isolated from the chaos. A man in a deep blue hoodie, mid-30s, average height, unremarkable features. He walked with the resigned slouch of every exhausted parent navigating an airport with children in tow. 3 kids clustered around him, a boy who looked about 8 and 2 girls, one maybe 6 and the other no more than 7. The boy held the man's left hand. The younger girl gripped his right. The third child, a girl with soft brown hair, walked slightly behind, her small hand resting on the man's jacket. They looked like a family. A tired, stressed, completely ordinary family. Except Vigil had gone absolutely still in a way that made Silas's pulse spike. The dog wasn't growling, wasn't barking, wasn't displaying any of the aggressive alerts that drew public attention. Instead, he'd become a statue of pure focus, his entire being radiating a silent scream that only Silas could interpret. Wrong, wrong, wrong. Silas studied the group more carefully. The man kept his head down, the hood shadowing his features just enough to frustrate facial recognition cameras. Not suspicious on its own, just practical for someone who valued privacy. He spoke to the children in low tones Silas couldn't hear from this distance. The kids responded with small nods, their movements synchronized in a way that suggested practiced routine. A father managing his children through the stress of travel. Nothing more. But Vigil's body language told a completely different story. The dog's nostrils flared in rapid succession, processing scent molecules Silas would never perceive. Vigil had been trained to detect fear, not the momentary anxiety of nervous flyers, but deep, sustained terror. The kind that altered body chemistry, that leaked through pores in invisible chemical signatures only a dog's nose could identify. Cortisol, adrenaline, the hormonal cocktail of prey animals in the presence of predators. And Vigil was detecting it in overwhelming concentrations. Silas felt the familiar war begin in his mind. Protocol said to observe, to gather evidence, to have concrete justification before intervention. Protocol said that a dog's alert wasn't enough, that people had rights, that approaching without cause could mean lawsuits, suspensions, career-ending complaints. Protocol had let Sophia disappear. Easy, Silas whispered, more to himself than to Vigil. His hand remained on the dog's shoulder, feeling the controlled violence barely contained beneath fur and training. Vigil wanted to move, wanted to interpose himself between those children and the man. Wanted to do what every fiber of his being was screaming was necessary. But he waited, because Silas had taught him to wait, because 4 years of partnership had built a trust that ran both directions. The man in the blue hoodie approached the security line, guiding the children with practiced efficiency. He pulled out boarding passes from his jacket pocket with one hand while maintaining contact with the kids. Professional. Smooth. Like he'd done this 100 times before. The youngest girl, the one with messy blonde curls, stumbled slightly, and the man's hand tightened on hers. Not cruelly but firmly, correctively, the way you'd grip something you couldn't afford to lose. Vigil's head lowered a fraction, his eyes tracking the group with predatory intensity. Silas made his decision. "Let's go," he said quietly, releasing Vigil's shoulder. The dog moved forward immediately, not running but walking with deliberate purpose, closing the distance between them and the man in the blue hoodie. Silas followed, his badge already shifting on his belt, his mind cataloging exits and backup positions and the 100 things that could go catastrophically wrong if he was making a mistake. But Vigil was never wrong. Not about fear. As Silas closed the distance, the wrongness crystallized into specifics. The boy, Cale, he'd learn later, wore a heavy winter jacket despite the late April warmth that had turned the terminal into a greenhouse. Not just a light windbreaker, but the kind of puffy, insulated coat meant for January cold snaps. Sweat beaded at his hairline, dampening the collar, but he didn't complain, didn't ask to take it off, just walked in mechanical silence, his small hand locked in the man's grip. The youngest girl's shoes didn't match. Bram, the one with messy blonde curls, wore a pink sneaker on her left foot and a white sandal on her right. The kind of mismatched footwear that happened when you dressed a child in the dark, or when you grabbed whatever fit from a bin of stolen clothing. Her patterned leggings were too short, exposing pale ankles that suggested she'd grown since they were purchased, or since they'd been taken from someone else's suitcase. But it was Leora who made Silas's stomach turn. Her soft brown hair had been brushed to perfection, every strand in place, held back with a simple clip that caught the terminal's fluorescent lighting. Her clothes matched beautifully: gray sweater, navy skirt, black boots that looked almost new. She could have stepped out of a department store catalog. Picture perfect, except for her eyes. They were empty, not sad, not frightened in any way a casual observer would recognize, just hollow, like someone had scooped out everything that made a child and left only the performance of one behind. She walked with careful steps, maintaining exact distance from the man's back, her hand resting on his jacket with the lightest possible contact. None of the children carried anything personal. No backpacks decorated with cartoon characters. No tablets clutched in small hands for distraction. No stuffed animals or comfort blankets or even crumpled coloring books. Nothing that suggested these were children on a family trip, excited or bored or complaining about screen time. They carried nothing because they owned nothing. The man spoke without turning his head, his voice low and controlled. "Almost there. Remember what I told you." The children nodded in unison. Rehearsed. Automatic. "If anyone asks, what do you say?" "We're going to visit Grandma," Cale recited, his voice flat. "Good boy." The man's hand shifted on Cale's shoulder. Not affectionate, but proprietary. "And you?" He directed this at Bram. "We're going to visit Grandma," she whispered, her mismatched feet shuffling forward. Leora said nothing. She didn't need to. Her silence had already been accounted for, built into whatever script the man had constructed. Silas watched the exchange from 20 feet back, vigil vibrating with restrained urgency at his side. Every detail screamed wrongness. The clothes that didn't fit the season, the shoes that didn't match, the perfect hair on a hollow child, the absence of anything that suggested love or care or family. But details weren't proof. Inconsistencies weren't crimes. Poor fashion choices and quiet children didn't justify an intervention that could destroy an innocent man's day, his reputation, his trust in the very system meant to protect him. Except Vigil's body was rigid as iron, his breathing shallow, his entire being broadcasting one message with absolute certainty. These children are in danger. And Silas had learned to trust that message over everything else. "Sir," he called out, his voice carrying the weight of authority he'd earned over 11 years. "I need you to stop for a moment." The man in the blue hoodie froze mid-step. The man turned slowly, his face arranging itself into an expression of confused cooperation, the look of every innocent traveler stopped by security, slightly annoyed but willing to comply. "Is there a problem, officer?" Silas opened his mouth to respond, but movement in his peripheral vision stopped him cold. Leora's right hand had moved to her left sleeve. She brushed it once, slowly, her small fingers trailing down the gray fabric from shoulder to elbow in a deliberate stroke that looked like she was smoothing wrinkles that didn't exist. Then again, the same measured pace, the same careful pressure. The third time, Vigil's ears snapped forward so fast Silas heard the rush of air. The dog's entire focus narrowed to the girl with an intensity that bordered on supernatural. A low whine built in his throat. Not aggression, but recognition. The sound of a working dog identifying exactly what he'd been trained to detect. Leora's eyes lifted. Not to the man. Not to Silas. To Vigil. The connection lasted maybe 2 seconds. 2 seconds of a 7-year-old girl staring at a German shepherd with an expression that shattered Silas's heart. Hope and terror braided together so tightly, he couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. Then her hand moved to her chest. Her fingers formed a specific configuration, thumb and index finger creating a small triangle, the remaining fingers splayed in a pattern that looked almost like she was making a pledge. But it wasn't random. It wasn't a child's nervous fidget. It was a signal. Silas's breath caught. He'd seen variations of that gesture in K-9 training, in handler seminars, in the specialized courses where they taught officers how to identify victims who couldn't speak. A distress signal designed to be subtle enough to avoid alerting captors but distinctive enough for trained observers to recognize. But this wasn't the standard version. This was modified, simplified, the way you teach a concept to a child, taking something complex and breaking it down to its essential elements so small hands could replicate it. Someone had taught her this. Someone who knew how K-9 units operated. Someone who understood that trained dogs could read human distress in ways that transcended language or circumstance. Someone who'd prepared this little girl for the worst day of her life. Leora's hand dropped back to her side immediately, her face returning to that terrible hollow neutrality. But her message had been sent and received. Vigil's body was trembling now, every muscle screaming to act, to protect, to interpose himself between this child and the danger she'd just confirmed. The man in the blue hoodie followed Silas's gaze to Leora, his expression flickering for just a fraction of a second. Annoyance, maybe calculation, before smoothing back into confused innocence. "Officer, we're really running late for our flight. If this is just a random check—" "It's not random," Silas interrupted, his voice harder now. His hand moved to his radio, thumb hovering over the call button. "I need to see identification for you and the children. Boarding passes, custody documentation if you have it." Of course. The man's tone remained cooperative, but his free hand, the one not gripping Cale, moved toward his jacket pocket with the kind of practiced smoothness that made Silas's instincts scream. Vigil stepped forward, placing himself between the man and the children without any command from Silas. The dog's message was clear, not one step closer. Silas stepped directly into the man's path, closing the distance to less than 6 feet. Professional but unmistakably blocking. Vigil moved with him, a living barrier of fur and muscle and absolute certainty. The man's hand emerged from his jacket pocket holding a slim leather wallet, his movements deliberately slow and non-threatening. "I understand you're just doing your job, officer. Here's everything you need." He produced boarding passes first, 4 of them neatly folded together. Silas took them, scanning the printed names without breaking eye contact. Michael Foster and 3 children. Cale Foster, Bram Foster, Leora Foster. The departure gate was printed clearly. B-17, departing in 45 minutes to Denver. "Family emergency," the man explained, his tone hitting the perfect note of stressed but cooperative. "My mother had a stroke yesterday. We're trying to get there before." He paused, glancing down at the children with manufactured concern. "Well, you understand. It's been a difficult day for all of us." The story was flawless. The kind of narrative that explained everything. The children's unusual quietness, the mismatched clothing hastily packed, the urgency, the stress. A family in crisis, racing against time and tragedy. Silas had heard 1,000 variations of this story over 11 years. Most of them were true. "Driver's license," Silas said evenly. The man produced it without hesitation. Michael James Foster, Denver, Colorado. The photo matched the face in front of him. Same features, same build, same unremarkable quality that made him forgettable in crowds. The license wasn't expired, wasn't obviously fake. And custody documentation for the children? A flicker of irritation crossed the man's face, quickly suppressed. "Custody documentation? Officer, these are my children. We're not going through a custody situation. We're going to see my dying mother." Standard procedure when traveling with minors, Silas replied, the lie coming easily. It wasn't standard procedure, not unless there were visible signs of distress or conflicting claims. But the man didn't know that. Or if he did, he was choosing not to challenge it. The man's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I don't carry custody papers when I travel with my own children. That's not... Look, I really don't understand what this is about. We've done nothing wrong. While they spoke, Vigil had repositioned himself with surgical precision. The dog now stood between the man and all three children, his body angled so that any forward movement would require going through him first. He hadn't barked, hadn't growled, hadn't done anything that would appear aggressive to the growing number of travelers glancing their way. But his message was absolute. You don't touch them. The man noticed. His eyes flicked to Vigil, then back to Silas, and something changed in his expression. A hardening, a calculation. The mask of the stressed father slipping just enough to reveal something colder underneath. Is there a problem with your dog, officer? He seems unusually agitated. He's not agitated, Silas said quietly. He's alert. There's a difference. Alert to what, exactly? That's what I'm trying to determine, Mr. Foster. Silas glanced down at the children, addressing them directly for the first time. Kids, are you okay? 3 pairs of eyes stared back at him. Cale's gaze dropped immediately to the floor. Bram's lower lip trembled. Leora remained perfectly still, her hollow expression unchanged. None of them spoke. They're scared, the man interjected smoothly. They've never been stopped by police before. It's intimidating for children. Silas's thumb pressed the radio button on his shoulder. Dispatch, this is Thorne. I need backup at Security Checkpoint C, Terminal B. Priority response. The man's cooperative facade finally cracked. This is ridiculous. We're going to miss our flight. Then we'll get you on the next one, Silas replied. After we clear up a few questions. Vigil didn't move, didn't waver, and neither did Silas. Vigil's transformation into something immovable was silent and absolute. The dog didn't bare his teeth, didn't issue the low, rumbling growl that would have drawn immediate attention from every traveler within earshot. He simply stood, his body positioned with geometric precision between the man and the children, and radiated an unmistakable truth. You will not pass. The man, Michael Foster or whoever he really was, tested that boundary. He shifted his weight slightly to the left, angling as if to step around Vigil toward Leora. The dog matched him instantly, his body flowing like water to block the path. The man tried the other direction, a casual movement disguised as adjusting his stance. Vigil mirrored him again, maintaining exact distance, his amber eyes locked on the man's center mass with unblinking focus. Your dog needs to move, the man said, his voice still controlled but developing an edge. He's blocking us from getting to our gate. He'll move when I tell him to, Silas replied, watching the micro-expressions flickering across the man's face like a silent film. There, the pupils dilated slightly, expanding from pinpoints to wider circles as adrenaline began flooding his system. The man's breathing changed, becoming shallower, faster, though he was trying to control it. His hands, which had been relaxed at his sides, curled slightly, fingers contracting in unconscious preparation for fight or flight. Classic stress responses. The body's autonomic system betraying what the conscious mind tried to hide. This is harassment, the man said, his tone hardening. I'm traveling with my children to see my dying mother, and you're preventing us from... Then another few minutes won't matter, Silas interrupted. Backup is on the way. We'll get this sorted out quickly. The man's jaw clenched. He glanced past Silas toward the security checkpoint, calculating distances, exit points, the thinning crowd that might provide cover. Silas recognized the look. He'd seen it in countless suspects over the years, that moment when they weighed the odds of running versus staying. "I want to speak to your supervisor," the man demanded. "This is completely unacceptable. My children are terrified." He moved suddenly, stepping forward with more aggression, trying to push into Vigil's space and force the dog to yield. Vigil didn't budge, didn't retreat even an inch. Instead, the dog lowered his center of gravity, his stance widening into something that would take a freight train to dislodge. His ears remained forward, his tail straight out behind him, his entire being communicating something primal and unmistakable. "I am the wall between you and them. Test me and find out what happens." The man froze mid-step, finally registering what Silas had known for 4 years, that Vigil wasn't just well-trained. He was utterly committed. This dog would die before letting those children be taken. Behind Vigil's protective barrier, the 3 children stood in absolute silence. Kale's small chest rose and fell with rapid breaths. Bram's fingers twisted in the hem of her shirt. Leora remained statue still, but her eyes had fixed on Vigil's back with an expression Silas couldn't quite read. Something between desperate hope and disbelief. The man's breathing was audible now, his composure fracturing in real time. Sweat beaded at his hairline despite the airport's aggressive air conditioning. His hands trembled slightly before he shoved them into his jacket pockets. "I'll sue," he said, but the threat lacked conviction. "I'll sue the department. I'll sue you personally." Footsteps approached from behind, backup arriving, multiple officers responding to Silas's call. The man heard them too. His eyes darted toward the sound, then back to Vigil, then to the children. Calculating, realizing, understanding that the window for whatever he'd planned was closing. Vigil's tail gave one deliberate wag. Not friendly, not playful, victorious. 2 uniformed officers arrived within 90 seconds. Officer Martinez and Officer Chun, both veterans who read Silas's expression and immediately understood this wasn't routine. "We need a private screening room," Silas said quietly. "All of them. Separate the adult from the children once we're inside." Martinez nodded, already keying his radio to alert the security office. Chun positioned herself on the man's other side, her hand resting casually near her duty belt. Not threatening, but present. The man's indignation escalated as they guided the group toward the secure corridor beyond the checkpoint. "This is kidnapping. You're preventing me from traveling freely. I have rights, my children have rights. You can't just detain us without cause." "We have cause," Silas replied evenly. AK-9 alert constitutes reasonable suspicion. You're not under arrest. We're conducting a secondary screening. It happens dozens of times a day. That was partly true. Secondary screenings did happen constantly. But not like this. Not with Vigil's entire body still vibrating with controlled urgency. Not with children this silent. Not with Silas's instincts screaming that they were minutes away from uncovering something that would justify every rule he was bending. The screening room was deliberately uninviting. White walls, fluorescent lighting, a metal table bolted to the floor, chairs that couldn't be weaponized. Security cameras in 3 corners, their red recording lights steady and unblinking. "Mr. Foster, if you'll wait here," Martinez said, gesturing to the table. "Officer Chun will stay with you. We need to screen the children separately, standard protocol for minors." The man's composure cracked wider. "You're not separating me from my children. Absolutely not. I don't consent to." "You don't need to consent to a security screening," Chan interrupted, her voice professionally neutral. "Please have a seat." For a moment, Silas thought the man might bolt. His weight shifted toward the door, his pupils dilating further, every muscle tensing for explosive movement. But Chen's hand had moved to her radio, and Martinez had positioned himself between the man and the exit. The mathematics were simple. He couldn't win. The man sat, his hands pressing flat against the metal table. "I want a lawyer. I'm invoking my right to." "You're not under arrest," Silas repeated. "You're free to leave at any time, but the children stay until we've completed our screening." He guided the 3 children into an adjacent room before the man could respond, Vigil moving with them like a shadow. The door closed with a soft click that felt thunderous. The change was immediate. Bram's lower lip had been trembling in the hallway. Now, separated from the man, it broke into full crying, soft, hiccuping sobs that shook her small shoulders. She sank to the floor, her mismatched shoes tucking beneath her, her face buried in her hands. Cale remained standing, but his gaze dropped to the industrial carpet. His jaw clenched so tight Silas could see the muscle jumping. His hands formed fists at his sides, the knuckles white with pressure. Leora moved toward Vigil with slow, deliberate steps. She knelt beside the dog, her movements careful, as if approaching something sacred. Her small hand lifted, hovering for a moment above Vigil's head. Then she placed it down gently on his fur. 1 tap, deliberate and measured. 2 taps, the pressure increasing slightly. 3 taps. Vigil's eyes closed. A sound emerged from deep in his chest. Not a growl, but something closer to a whimper. Recognition. Confirmation. Leora's hollow expression finally cracked. Her eyes filled with tears that didn't fall, her mouth trembling as she pressed her forehead against Vigil's neck. "Good dog," she whispered, her voice breaking on the words. "Good dog. You saw me." Silas knelt slowly beside them, his throat tight. "Leora, can you tell me what's happening? Can you tell me who that man is?" Her hand continued stroking Vigil's head in that same deliberate pattern. 3 taps, over and over, like a mantra or a prayer. "He's not my father," she whispered. "He took me." Silas left Martinez with the children and Vigil while he sprinted to the Security Operations Center, his badge already out, his mind racing through the implications of what Leora had just confessed. The Ops Center was a windowless room filled with wall-mounted monitors displaying every angle of the terminal in real time. Head of Security Tom Brennan looked up from his coffee, reading Silas's expression instantly. "Tell me you have something," Silas said, breathing hard. "Male, mid-30s, deep blue hoodie. I need footage from the last 2 hours. Every camera." Brennan's fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up archived feeds. "What am I looking for?" "Child abduction. 3 separate incidents. He's not their father." The words hung in the air for a moment before Brennan's face hardened. He pulled up terminal-wide footage, scrubbing backward through time-stamped recordings with practiced efficiency. "There," Silas pointed at a monitor showing Gate C9. "Slow it down." The timestamp read 1:47 p.m., 93 minutes ago. An elderly couple sat near the gate, the woman clutching a floral carry-on bag while the man studied a departure board. Between them, partially obscured by their bodies, sat a little girl with soft brown hair. Leora. A man in a blue hoodie approached from the left side of the frame, moving with casual confidence. He gestured toward something off-camera. A help desk, maybe, or an information counter. The elderly woman looked where he pointed, distracted. The man leaned down, speaking to Leora directly. 15 seconds later, Leora was standing. The man took her hand. They walked out of frame together. The entire interaction took 28 seconds. The grandparents didn't notice for another 40 seconds. When they did, The woman's mouth opened in a silent scream that didn't need audio to communicate absolute terror. "Jesus!" Brennan whispered. "Run it again." They watched 3 more times, analyzing the man's body language, his practiced movements, the way he'd positioned himself to block the grandparents' line of sight while he worked. "Next one," Silas demanded, his jaw clenched. Brennan pulled up footage from Gate B14. Timestamp: 2:19 p.m., 61 minutes ago. A man stood at a vending machine, his back to the seating area while he fed bills into the slot. Behind him, 2 children sat alone. A boy in a heavy jacket and a little girl with blonde curls. They watched their father with the patient boredom of children who'd been told to wait. The man in the blue hoodie entered the frame from the right. He knelt beside the children, speaking quickly. Showed them something on his phone, a photograph maybe, or a fabricated message. The boy looked uncertain. The man gestured urgently toward the bathrooms, then toward where the father stood, still focused on the vending machine, oblivious. The boy nodded, took his sister's hand, stood up. 22 seconds from first contact to departure. The father didn't turn around until the vending machine dispensed his drink. By the time he spun, searching frantically for his children, they were already gone. "He's a professional," Brennan said, his voice tight with controlled rage. "Look at the timing." He waited until the parents were maximally distracted, approached from blind spots, had exit routes planned. Silas leaned closer to the monitor. "Can you track his movement through the terminal? Show me everywhere he went." Brennan's fingers worked the system, pulling camera feeds into a timeline. The pattern emerged like a constellation. The man moving through crowds with deliberate purpose, pausing at gates, observing families, selecting targets with horrifying calculation. He wasn't just opportunistic, Silas realized aloud. He was hunting, watching for the perfect moment when parents looked away. The final piece of footage showed the man collecting all 3 children near the food court, assembling them like pieces of a set, adjusting their clothing, speaking to them with his head bent low, rehearsing, building a family from stolen parts. "I need prints of every frame," Silas said, "and I need facial recognition run through every database we have access to. TSA, FBI, Interpol, everything." Brennan was already moving. "You got it. That son of a bitch isn't getting on any plane." Silas turned toward the door, then paused. "Tom, there could be families out there right now who don't know their children are missing yet. Alert all gates. Description of the kids. We need to find the parents." "Already on it." Silas ran back toward the screening room, his heart pounding. They had evidence. They had timeline. They had proof. And somewhere in this airport, 3 families were about to learn their children were alive. Silas returned to the screening room with printed surveillance images in hand, his badge of proof. Chun stood outside the door, her expression grim. "He's asking for a lawyer every 30 seconds, she reported, getting more agitated. "Good," Silas replied. "He should be." He entered the room where the man sat rigidly at the metal table, his hands now clasped in front of him, his jaw set. The cooperative facade had been completely abandoned, replaced by cold calculation. Silas laid the photographs across the table one by one. Gate C9, timestamp visible. Gate B14, crystal clear. The food court assembly point where 3 stolen children became a fabricated family. "Michael Foster," Silas said quietly. "Except that's not your real name, is it?" The man stared at the images, his pupils contracting. For 5 full seconds, he didn't move, didn't breathe, the mental gears spinning behind his eyes as he assessed his options and found them all catastrophically bad. Then he lunged, not toward Silas, but toward the door, explosive movement born of pure desperation. Chun moved to intercept, but the man was faster than his average build suggested, driven by the mathematics of a cornered predator who knew this was his last chance. He made it 3 steps before Martinez tackled him from behind. They hit the floor hard, the impact echoing off the bare walls. The man writhed, trying to break free, his composure shattered into animal panic. Martinez wrenched his arms behind his back, Chun moving in to help secure him. "You don't understand," the man gasped, his face pressed against the industrial carpet. "You don't know who you're dealing with. They'll come for you. They'll—" "Cuff him," Silas ordered. "Read him his rights. He's under arrest for kidnapping." The metallic click of handcuffs ended the struggle. Martinez hauled the man to his feet, and Chun began the Miranda recitation in steady, professional tones that made the situation terrifyingly real. Silas left them and crossed to the adjacent room where the children waited with vigil. Leora still sat beside the dog, her hand resting on his head. But now her eyes were open, watching the door, her hollow expression beginning to fill with something fragile and tentative. "Hope." Silas knelt at her level, careful to maintain distance, to let her control the space. "Leora, you're safe now. He can't hurt you anymore. But I need you to tell me what happened. Can you do that?" Her voice emerged barely above a whisper, each word seeming to cost her something. "My grandparents and I were sitting at the gate, waiting for our flight to Seattle. He came over and said there was a problem with our tickets. Said we needed to go to the help desk." She swallowed hard, her hand tightening in Vigil's fur. "Grandma went first. I followed. But then he stopped me and said she went a different way. He showed me his phone. It had a picture of her like he'd just taken it. He said if I didn't come with him quietly, something bad would happen to her." Tears tracked down her cheeks now, the dam finally breaking. "I didn't know what to do. I wanted to scream, but he said they were watching, that they'd know. So I went with him." Cale spoke then, his voice shaking. "He told us our dad was hurt, that he sent someone to get us. He had Dad's wallet, showed us his driver's license. We thought—" Bram was crying again, softer now, exhausted. Leora looked up at Silas, her brown eyes ancient with trauma. "I remembered what my daddy taught me, before he died. He was a K-9 officer like you. He told me that if I was ever in trouble and couldn't ask for help, I should tell the dog. He said dogs always know the truth, that they can smell fear, smell lies, smell danger." Her hand moved through Vigil's fur in that deliberate pattern, 1, 2, 3. "Daddy showed me the signal, made it a game. Said if I ever saw a police dog and needed help, I should tap 3 times. The dog would understand even if people didn't." She pressed her face against Vigil's neck. "I didn't think it would work, but he saw me. He knew." Vigil's tail wagged once, gentle and certain. "Your father was right," Silas said, his throat tight. "Dogs always know." The Verity couple arrived first. Escorted by airport security through corridors, they'd searched frantically for the past 90 minutes. Mrs. Verity's face was ravaged by tears, her floral carry-on forgotten somewhere behind her. Mr. Verity leaned heavily on a cane, his elderly frame trembling with exhaustion and terror. Then they saw Leora. Mrs. Verity made a sound that wasn't quite a scream, wasn't quite a sob. Something primal and broken that came from a place beyond language. She crossed the room in a stumbling run, collapsing to her knees as she pulled her granddaughter into her arms with such force that Silas worried she might hurt the child. But Leora didn't pull away. She buried her face in her grandmother's shoulder and finally, completely, broke. The hollow composure shattered into grief and relief and trauma, releasing itself in great, shuddering sobs that shook her entire body. "We looked everywhere," Mrs. Verity whispered, rocking back and forth. Everywhere. We thought, oh God, we thought. Mr. Verity knelt beside them, his cane clattering to the floor, his weathered hands joining the embrace. 3 generations holding each other like they could fuse back into wholeness through sheer force of love. Julian arrived 6 minutes later, sprinting through the terminal with security struggling to keep up. He burst through the door wild-eyed and desperate, his face transformed by hope and terror in equal measure. Cale, Bram. The children turned, saw their father, and ran. Julian collapsed to his knees as they crashed into him, his arms wrapping around both of them, his face pressed between their heads. He made no sound at first, just held them with the kind of grip that suggested he might never let go again. Then the sobs came, deep, wrenching sounds from a man who'd spent 61 minutes believing he'd lost everything that mattered. "I'm sorry," he gasped between breaths. "I'm so sorry." I looked away for 10 seconds. 10 seconds. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry." "We're okay, Dad," Cale whispered, his own tears soaking his father's shirt. "We're okay now." Silas stood back, giving the family space, his hand unconsciously resting on Vigil's head. The dog sat calmly beside him, his tail wagging in slow, satisfied arcs. Mission accomplished. Children safe. The universe restored to proper order. Mrs. Verity looked up from her embrace, her eyes finding Silas across the room. "How did you know? How did you find her?" Silas opened his mouth, but Leora spoke first. "The dog saw me, Grandma, just like Daddy said he would." Mrs. Verity's expression crumpled with fresh grief and gratitude. "Elias," she whispered. "Oh, Elias." Leora pulled away slightly, turning to face Silas with swollen eyes but clear voice. "My father was Sergeant Elias Vance. He worked K9 for 8 years before he died. He used to bring his dog home, Rex. Big German shepherd, like Vigil." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "When I was 5, Daddy taught me a game. He said if I was ever scared and couldn't talk, I should signal Rex. 3 taps. He said dogs could hear truth that people missed, that they could smell fear and sadness and danger, that they always knew." Her voice dropped to barely audible. "He died when I was 6. Car accident on the way to a call. I didn't think I'd ever need the signal. But today," she looked at Vigil, fresh tears streaming. "Today I remembered. And he saw me." Silas knelt beside Vigil, his hands still resting on the dog's head, his throat too tight for words. Sergeant Elias Vance had been dead for years, but his legacy had reached across time to save his daughter when she needed it most. The weight Silas had carried since Sophia, the failure, the guilt, the what-ifs, began to lift. He hadn't followed protocol today, hadn't waited for authorization, hadn't trusted the documentation or the smooth explanations. He'd trusted Vigil, trusted the truth only a dog could see. And 3 children were going home. Vigil's tail thumped against the floor 1, 2, 3, like an answer, like a promise, like a father's final gift to the daughter he'd prepared for a day he'd hoped would never come.